There is a wooden bin behind my barn that has never once cost me a single euro to fill, and yet every spring it hands me soil so rich that my neighbor asks me what I am hiding back there. I am not hiding anything. I am doing what my grandmother Rosina did behind the same barn 60 years ago, before anyone in our village had ever heard the word fertilizer. My name is Martin Hofer. I grew up on a small farm in the foothills south of Munich, and I want to tell you something that should make you a little uneasy by the time I am finished. The average family in this country spends more than $200 a year on bags of fertilizer and soil amendments for a garden that is, frankly, not even that big. Some spend $300 or $400, and every single year they buy it again, because the bag runs out and the soil never really gets better, just fed for a season and then hungry again. My grandmother never bought a bag of anything. Not once in her whole life. And her vegetable garden, the one behind the farmhouse where I grew up, fed 8 people through every winter I can remember, with tomatoes so heavy on the vine they had to be tied up with old cloth, and potatoes so good the priest used to ask for a sack of them every October. She did it with a pile of rotting kitchen scraps and garden waste behind the barn. That is the whole secret. But there is a right way to build that pile and a wrong way. And most people who try composting today do it the wrong way and give up after one bad-smelling summer. I am going to show you exactly what she did, in the order she did it, so you do not make the mistakes that ruin it for so many people. Stay with me, because by the end of this you will understand something the garden centers in town will never tell you, which is that the dirt they are selling you in plastic bags is something you can make for free in your own backyard, and make better than they sell it. Let me start with what my grandmother always said to me when I was a boy standing next to her at that pile with a basket of potato peels in my hands. She said, "The pile is not garbage, Martin. The pile is a kitchen, and what comes out of it feeds the whole garden for the next 10 years. I did not understand that as a boy. I understand it now. A compost pile is not a place where things go to rot and disappear. It is a place where small creatures, the kind you cannot see, are working day and night turning old plant matter into the richest food a vegetable can eat. And once you understand what those small creatures need to do their work, you will never look at a bag of store-bought fertilizer the same way again. Here is the first thing most people get wrong, and it is the reason so many compost piles fail. People throw in whatever they have without thinking about balance, and the pile either sits there doing nothing for a whole year, or it turns into a wet, stinking mess that draws flies and makes the neighbors complain. My grandmother never measured anything with a scale. She measured with her eyes and her hands, the way farmers measure everything. But what she was doing without ever using the word for it was balancing 2 kinds of material. The brown and the green, she called them, though she never used those English words. She called them the dry stuff and the wet stuff. The dry stuff is your dead leaves, your straw, your cardboard torn into pieces, your sawdust if you have it, your old hay. This is what feeds the slow, steady work. The wet stuff is your kitchen scraps, your grass clippings, your vegetable peelings, your coffee grounds. This is what feeds the heat and the speed. The old farmers in our valley always said 3 parts dry to 1 part wet, roughly by the bucket, not by the scale. And it turns out the agricultural scientists who study this today, with their laboratories and their measuring instruments, came to almost the exact same number. They call it the carbon-to-nitrogen ratio, and they will tell you the sweet spot is somewhere around 25 to 30 parts carbon for every 1 part nitrogen. My grandmother never heard that term in her life, but her hands already knew it from 60 years of building these piles behind the barn. Get this ratio wrong in one direction, too much wet, too much green, and the pile turns slimy and starts to smell like an old swamp. That smell is nitrogen escaping into the air as a gas instead of staying in your soil where it belongs, which means you are literally watching your fertility float away. Get it wrong in the other direction. Too much dry, too much brown, and the pile just sits there, cold and lifeless, because the little creatures doing the work have nothing rich enough to eat, and they go to sleep. So that is the first secret. 3 parts dry to 1 part wet, mixed together, not layered in thick slabs but tossed together loosely, the way you would toss a salad. Now here is the second secret, and this is the one that surprises people the most because it goes against everything the bag of fertilizer at the store wants you to believe. A good compost pile gets hot. Not warm, hot. If you put your hand into the middle of a properly built pile about a week after you start it, you will feel heat coming off it like a loaf of bread fresh from the oven. My grandmother used to push a broom handle into the center of the pile and pull it back out to feel if it was warm to the touch. That was her thermometer. What is happening in there is that billions of tiny creatures, bacteria too small to ever see, are feeding on that mixture of dry and wet material, and as they feed, they multiply, and as they multiply, they produce heat, the same way your own body produces heat when you are working hard in the field. A well-built pile can reach temperatures well above 130 degrees Fahrenheit, sometimes climbing past 150. That is hot enough to kill almost every weed seed that finds its way into the pile, and hot enough to kill the kind of harmful organisms that might otherwise make their way into your vegetable garden. This is why my grandmother was never afraid to throw old, half-rotten vegetables into the pile, or weeds that had already gone to seed in the garden. The heat of the pile took care of what the spray bottle takes care of for everyone else, except it cost her nothing and harmed nothing. This is the part that should make you a little angry once you understand it. The garden centers sell you a bag of soil that has been heated and treated and bagged in a factory somewhere, trucked across the country, and sold to you at a markup that would make your grandfather faint. And the truth is, your own pile of rotting leaves and potato peelings behind your house is doing the exact same heating and treating, for free, using nothing but what falls naturally into your yard every single week of the year. Now let me tell you how my grandmother actually built the pile step by step, because the building of it matters as much as the ingredients. She started with a simple wooden frame, 4 sides, open at the top and the bottom, made from scrapboards my grandfather had left over from other jobs around the farm. No nails needed if you do it the old way, just boards stacked log cabin style at the corners, which also means you can take the whole thing apart in a minute if you need to turn the pile or move it. At the very bottom, she laid down a layer of coarse material, broken twigs, corn stalks, anything stiff and woody. This was not for the compost itself. This was so air could move up from underneath, because the little creatures doing all that work need to breathe just like you and I do. Without air moving through the pile, the whole thing turns sour and slow. On top of that base, she began layering, though layering is not quite the right word, because she always told me not to build it like a cake with neat flat layers. Build it like a haystack that fell over, she said, all mixed and tumbled together. A good shovelful of the dry stuff, a good shovelful of the wet stuff, tossed and turned with a fork until they were mingled, not stacked. And here is something almost nobody talks about, but my grandmother never skipped it. Every few layers she would sprinkle in a thin scattering of plain garden soil, just a few handfuls, straight from the ground. She called this waking the pile up. What she was doing, though she never knew the science of it, was introducing more of those helpful bacteria and fungi straight from the earth itself, giving the pile a head start instead of waiting for them to arrive on their own. Water mattered too. And this is where I see so many people fail today. The pile needs to be damp all the way through, like a sponge that has been wrung out, not dripping wet and not bone dry. Too dry, and the little creatures cannot survive to do their work. Too wet, and you push the air back out and the whole pile turns into that slimy, smelly mess I warned you about. My grandmother's test was simple. She would grab a handful from the middle of the pile and squeeze it in her fist. If a few drops came out between her fingers, it was right. If water ran out in a stream, too wet. If nothing came out at all, too dry. And then, the part most people skip entirely because it sounds like work, but it is the part that turns a slow, lazy pile into a fast, powerful one. She turned it. Every week or two, with a pitchfork, she would take the pile apart and build it again, moving what was on the outside into the middle, and what was in the middle out to the edges. This puts fresh air back into the heart of the pile and lets every part of it get its turn in that hot center where the real transformation happens. Within about 2 to 3 months in the warmer part of the year, sometimes a little longer in the cold, what started as kitchen scraps, dead leaves, and garden waste had turned into something you would not recognize as garbage at all. Dark, crumbly, almost black, smelling like a forest floor after rain, not a single trace of what it used to be. My grandmother called it black gold, and she was not exaggerating. That material, dug into the vegetable beds every spring, is what fed our family for generations without a single bag bought from a store. Let me also tell you honestly what does not belong in the pile, because I will not pretend this works for everything you might think to throw in there. No meat, no dairy, no fats or oils, because these attract the wrong kind of animals to your yard, and they rot in a way that smells terrible and does not break down the same way plant material does. No diseased plants pulled from the garden, because while the heat of a good hot pile kills most problems, you do not want to take the risk with something that could spread sickness to next year's crop. And no weeds that have gone heavily to seed unless you are certain your pile reaches a real, sustained heat, because a cool, lazy pile will not kill those seeds. It will simply plant them for you all over the garden next spring. This is the honesty my grandmother always insisted on. She never told me a method was perfect if it was not. She told me what worked, and she told me where it could go wrong, because a half-truth in farming costs you a whole harvest. Now, I want you to think about what this actually means for your own garden, your own yard, your own kitchen. Every week, the average household throws away pounds of vegetable peelings, coffee grounds, eggshells, apple cores, and yard waste like fallen leaves and grass clippings. All of that, every bit of it, is the exact raw material my grandmother used to feed a family of 8 for generations, without ever buying a single bag of soil amendment. Instead of paying the trash company to haul it away, and instead of paying the garden center to sell you back something similar in a plastic bag, you can simply put it in a pile in the corner of your own yard and let the same process that has worked for thousands of years do the work for you. This is not some forgotten magic trick. It is simpler than that, and that is exactly why nobody makes money telling you about it. There is no company that profits when you stop buying their fertilizer. There is no salesman who knocks on your door to teach you how to build a compost frame out of scrap wood. The knowledge just quietly faded out of most households because there was no one standing to gain from keeping it alive, except the families who never stopped doing it themselves. My grandmother did not do this because she had read about sustainability somewhere or because it was trendy in her village. She did it because it was simply how things were done, and because wasting good material when the soil needed feeding made no sense to her at all. Waste nothing that the earth can still use, she used to say, and that single sentence built the soil under our entire farm. So, here is what I want you to do. Find a corner of your yard, away from the house if you can, and build a simple frame from whatever scrap wood you have lying around, or even just a circle of wire fencing if that is easier. Start saving your kitchen scraps in a small bucket by the sink, the peelings, the cores, the coffee grounds, the eggshells. Start saving your dry leaves and grass clippings instead of bagging them for the trash. Mix them together, roughly 3 parts dry to 1 part wet. Water it until it feels like a wrung-out sponge, and turn it with a fork every week or 2. Give it a season, and dig your hand into the middle of that pile in 2 or 3 months, and feel what your own kitchen and your own yard have made for free. Tell me in the comments where you live and what your soil has always struggled with, whether it is clay that holds too much water, or sand that lets everything wash straight through, because compost helps both. And I want to hear how your pile comes along over the next few months. I read every comment, and the stories you send back are exactly why I keep making these. Next time, I want to show you something my grandfather built into our root cellar that kept our vegetables fresh through the entire winter without a single hour of electricity, using nothing but the slope of the hillside and a method his own father taught him in this same valley. It pairs perfectly with what I have shown you today, because good soil grows the food, and a good seller keeps it. Until then, save your scraps, build your pile, and remember, the people who worked this land with their own hands knew things we are only just starting to remember.